like a rock sure looks a lot like a lake.
Hello, I'm here this time to talk about a Scooby-Doo movie that I love. And a little more, I guess. Growing up, the direct-to-video Scooby-Doo films that were kicked off with Zombie Island were an integral part of my childhood, as they were with most people. These movies have been covered by many over the years, especially those initial 4 classics, but some of them have not been explored as heavily as I would like. There are 2 that I have things to say on that immediately come to mind, and we're going to start with this one, 2004's Scooby-Doo and the Loch Ness Monster. When other people talk about this one, it tends to be pretty mixed apparently, but for me, this one has always been one of my favorites since I first caught part of it on Cartoon Network at my grandmother's house and then later searched for a copy of it on VHS to see how it ended. Previous episodes on this channel were fun little bite-sized content, so I apologize in advance for whatever is going on with this one. The next movie I plan on covering, even if it might not end up being the next video, will also be much more critical than I plan on being here, so if that's your thing, then hope I eventually get to that one. Later in this video I'll also be covering not only the lore of Nessie, but also that time she appeared on the Scooby-Doo show, so don't just expect this to solely be about this movie. As for this Nessie movie itself, what's going on with it? This film is actually notable for being the film to set the stage for the rest of the Scooby-Doo direct-to-video films until they had a soft reboot in 2009. The 2 films before it, Legend of the Vampire and Monster of Mexico, took the films back to classic roots with a style more closely related to the then current TV series of What's New Scooby-Doo, but with a little retro flair. Legend of the Vampire specifically was Joseph Barbera's first solo project following the passing of William Hanna in 2001 the year before. These 2 films were also notable for being the final Scooby-Doo productions to be still credited under Hanna-Barbera Cartoons, though Warner Brothers Animation was fully producing them by that point. The coolest thing about them though was that, except for the late voice of Scooby, Don Messick, who passed away in 1997, the otherwise surviving voice cast reunited for the final time to voice the gang. They sounded aged, but were still recognizable and it was fun to hear them have one last turn. Loch Ness Monster, however, brought in the new normal. Now fully and only produced by Warner Brothers Animation, the film and all others until the reboot would now essentially be feature-length episodes of What's New Scooby-Doo. The art style is a little more clean than the previous 2 films to match the exact style of What's New, and the voice cast of this movie and that series would now be the permanent Scooby Gang cast until the reboot. Now voicing Daphne is the legendary Grey Griffin, who had previously voiced her in Scooby-Doo and the Cyber Chase 3 films back, and for the first time outside of What's New is Mindy Cohn as the voice of Velma. Grey is obviously still voicing Daphne today, and Mindy would voice Velma up until 2015. I'm still honestly a little salty she was recast at that point, but that's another story. Casey Kasem and Frank Welker would stay on as Shaggy, Fred, and Scooby from the previous 2 films, and of course the original series in terms of Fred and Shaggy, and what a great choice it was to keep them. The movie opens up with what is a cool idea, but is ultimately iffy in execution. The most questionable things about this movie are there any use of CG, which for what they had during production in 2003 just wasn't ready for everything they required it to do here. In this opening scene, it's used to give us the visual perspective of Nessie as she swims around the loch, and a lot of these visuals, especially on my TV in full HD, just do not hold up. It's nitpicky, but it's definitely all over the place and even at times pixelated. Not as bad as Monster of Mexico holds up in HD though. Nessie eventually makes her way out to the human action where we find a boat party hosted by Shannon Blake, Daphne's Scottish lesbian cousin. This year's first annual Highland Games are being held at the Blake Castle, and a lot is riding on Shannon to hold up the family name. 2 local hooligan brothers, Colin and Angus Haggart, jump into the loch, and we get a Jaws-esque scene as Nessie makes her way toward the boat. I really do like the direction on this and the point of view credits as it sets up Nessie as a credible threat for the film using that specific kind of horror film language to communicate the danger to the audience. We don't see Nessie outside of shadows, and the tension as the boat is attacked and sent out of control is well executed. Meanwhile, the gang is making their way up to the castle so Daphne can be there to support her cousin. Shaggy's terrified of the idea that Nessie is out there, and for once, Velma isn't convinced that the legend is a hoax. Or she's convinced, like most of us at least, that it's an interesting mystery. Scooby gets out to goof around, but something stirring in the loch sends him back to the van in terror. Whatever it is distracts Fred as it swims by and the mystery machine flies off the road and into the loch.
When I said get closer, this isn't exactly what I meant.
Daphne finally meets up with Shannon and the gang asks about the attack. The main theme in the music score by Thomas Chase that typically accompanies Shannon in particular is quite pleasing in my opinion.
Oh, I can't believe I'm really here. Guys, this is my cousin Shannon.
It's fittingly almost reminiscent of Titanic. Also showing up to the scene of the crash is Del Chillman, who I best can describe as Ronaldo from Steven Universe. For better or worse, he's one of the rare, weirdly recurring characters across movies, as he also shows up again for the Yeti-based film Chill Out, Scooby-Doo. In this movie, Del is an American tourist obsessed with Nessie and is here only to finally prove she's out there. Moving on, the movie takes the long-running gag of Daphne being known for getting into trouble and makes it a canonical issue the entire Blake family has to deal with.
The one thing we Blakes have been known for is being, how should I put this, danger-prone. What?
Stunning architecture. Love the gargoyle.
Nothing.
Shan explains to the gang that Nessie has been making herself known around the castle for a while now, and the direction on the scene is once again really fantastic, I think. The only downside is again the CG. Unfortunately, Nessie is pretty much always depicted with a CG model in this, and it really stands out. Thankfully, she's still kept in the dark here, which keeps it from being as distracting as it is later, and the design itself is otherwise quite good. Definitely one of the scarier monster designs for Scooby-Doo.
Like zoinks.
Also hanging around the castle is Professor Fiona Pembroke, a true Nessie believer and author of the book Velma has been reading on the way here. Professor Pembroke is trying to prove Nessie's validity herself, and has even taken some recent photo evidence. Arriving a little later is Sir Ian Loxley here as a judge for the games, and the ex-boss and rival author to the professor who seeks to prove Nessie is not real.
Velma, do you have a book for every occasion?
Actually, yes.
Unfortunately, the two of them refuse to get along because of their past working relationship and have to be split up. Later that night, Scooby's stomach won't stop growling after refusing to eat haggis earlier, leading he and Shaggy to go search for a midnight snack. Ultimately, they get spooked into running outside and lock themselves out. And just in time for Nessie to finally make her appearance. Her unfortunately distracting CG appearance. In the classic style, we see the two of them get chased all over the castle as Nessie destroys everything in her path. Some of the songs for the chase scenes in these movies, Samurai Sword, are not great, but this first one is pretty good.
Hang on to your friends and you'll get to whatever. Soon you'll be coming out the other side.
Less good is what eventually happens as they lead Nessie right into the Highland Games field where she destroys everything.
And I thought we Scottish spoke funny.
The gang finds them in the ruins, and the professor snaps some pictures of the footprints as evidence. Fed up with the mess and Nessie being used as the explanation, Sir Ian leaves, warning Shan of what he'll do to the Blake family name if it's not fixed in time. Meanwhile, upon further examination, Velma finds that the footprints lead into town instead of into the loch, which means...
Looks like we've got another mystery on our hands.
Only nobody's been able to solve this one for 1,500 years.
The gang heads down to ask the Haggards for help in rebuilding the field. Having seen the new photographic evidence, Dell is convinced of why Nessie is on the rampage.
If it weren't for those games, Nessie would be happy and healthy and minding her own business, man!
The gang heads to the professor's boat, though there aren't enough life jackets and the boat hatch is strangely locked from the inside. For safety, the gang splits up with Shaggy and Scooby taking the mystery machine. It's a good idea to stay off it since the boat isn't too far off from looking right out of the movie Jaws itself.
Woohoo! I'm king of the lake! Lock!
Speaking of movie boat references, that's a Titanic reference for me specifically.
You take the high road and I'll take the rocky road. Like Rocky Road ice cream, that is.
Honestly, this has been stuck in my head since hearing it as a child. Help me. A mysterious hand flips a road sign, sending Shaggy and Scooby down into an area they definitely shouldn't be in. Meanwhile, the others try to use the professor's equipment to search the loch, though her oddly outdated equipment makes it a struggle. Unfortunately, their search ends up still going too well despite that, as Nessie starts surrounding the boat. Fred is unable to drag or catch Nessie with his trap due to her strength, and she simply disappears under the boat.
I've got a feeling we're not in Coolsville anymore.
The van gets stuck in a giant footprint that belongs to, well... Again, the cell shading on the shadows here, CG that does not hold up. Another chase ensues and Scooby gets the van back to save Shaggy. Does anyone have this guy's license? Scooby ends up driving them off the edge and they fall right onto the professor's boat.
Somebody get that guy's license. Doggy license?
Hey, I just made that joke. Shaggy leads the others back to the giant footprints to investigate, and they clearly turn into tire tracks, furthering the mystery. The gang apologizes to the professor for all the damage, but knowing they got research done that ended with a productive sighting makes it easy to take. Not so easy as Sir Ian, who shows up with his own more expensive ship and crew to patrol the lock in case of any more disturbances, and his rivalry with the professor is as heated as ever.
What happened to my game?
Fred, I think you were playing the digital compass.
Well, I still got high score.
Gamer Fred confirmed. Using sonar technology on Sir Ian's boat, they notice a large Nessie-shaped anomaly that seems to vanish into thin air. Up top, Shaggy and Scooby decide to hide away in the mini-sub, which gives the others the perfect idea of using it to go find what disappeared themselves.
All it needs is a styling green paint job, and it'll be da bomb diggity.
I hate you. I deeply, deeply hate you. I loathe and despise you. Thanks to a distraction from a scared Scooby, the gang somehow safely makes it into the cave as planned, though they also stumble over an ancient warrior burial ground. Not so ancient is a screwdriver on the ground that Velma hones in on. Janky CG Nessie overhears the clue finding and decides it's time for another chase, and the gang rushes back to the sub, leading her to follow. We actually get a few rare hand-drawn Nessies here, and she looks quite pleasant compared to her CG design. After a few close calls and bangs, Sir Ian's crew safely gets the gang back aboard the ship. Later that night, the gang finds Del sleeping in the van.
I think he's sleeping on your poncho.
That's okay, he can keep it.
Someone stole his own Nessie-themed van by the castle, and the mystery is only getting deeper. Joined by Del, the gang tries to find the professor to help pull things together, but Nessie cuts in first.
Come and get it, you overgrown lizard!
Technically, Freddy, the monster wouldn't be a lizard. Lizards are ectothermic, whereas this monster is clearly amphibious.
Another chase across the Highlands ensues, and I have to imagine Nessie is pretty tired by now with how many we've had.
Hello, Governor. Care for a sweep of the old chimney, then?
Shaggy, this is not Mary Poppins. Mary Poppins is not even Scottish. Leave the bad Dick Van Dyke accents to me. Somehow, this particular chase is so intense that the mystery machine gets completely killed.
This is one sea serpent that could use some moisturizer.
Once things settle, it turns out that this isn't the real Nessie, but instead Del's stolen van made up to look like her, and the wheels match the tracks from before. But the van couldn't have been in the water earlier and wasn't stolen during some of the previous appearances, which means not every sighting can be tied to it. With a new plan from Velma, Shaggy and Scooby are sent out on the loch as bait while Daphne works with Sir Ian and Fred covers the trap. As the fog rolls in, Nessie shows up on the sonar again, and before Daphne can call Velma, Sir Ian's crew turns on him with the hopes of catching and selling Nessie. Capitalism at it again.
This fog is so thick you could cut it with a knife.
An old gag that's been used before, but I appreciate it. Unbeknownst to Shaggy and Scooby, Nessie shows up for her big finale, and the plan is set in motion.
You're right on top of it.
Gee, thanks for the compliment.
Shaggy, listen, it's really beneath you.
You know, I've always thought being live bait was beneath us, too.
It seems like everything is going according to plan until... Sir Ian's stolen ship destroys the setup in pursuit of the questionable CG Nessie. Thankfully, Daphne and Shannon make a break for it and stop the harpoon from hitting Nessie. Instead, it just almost kills Velma.
Jinkies!
The ship crashes into some rocks, but Nessie isn't ready to give up now that she's been antagonized. Oddly, the ship's magnet latches right onto Nessie, a supposedly organic creature, and a second Nessie is simultaneously chasing Shaggy and Scooby back on land. Daphne takes control and sends the magnetized water Nessie to knock the land Nessie into the previously planned trap, and it turns out this one was just a prank by Colin and Angus.
Rawr.
I love dumb boys. Daphne drops the water Nessie to the ground, exposing the mechanical insides, and... Professor Fiona Pembroke. The locked hatch was a secret passageway that led to a homemade submarine made to look like Nessie underneath the boat, which explains why her equipment is so outdated despite her funding. The professor's intent wasn't to harm anyone, however. She simply wanted Sir Ian to finally believe that Nessie was real because he would never look at her new evidence without some kind of sighting for himself, making the Highland Games the perfect opportunity. And speaking of those, they finally begin without a hitch. Although, what is going on with this crowd? Hello? What is this? Hi? But as the games continue, Sir Ian shows up angrily wanting an explanation for more images he believes to be part of the professor's hoax. It seems the sensor-activated camera that fell off during the underwater chase is picking something up 600 feet below, too deep for a submarine. Using the opportunity, the professor finally shows Sir Ian her recent photos and, so impressed, he resigns from the games to further explore with her. And Del is coming too. Daphne says goodbye to Shannon and the gang starts their journey back home, which leaves us with the best part of the movie.
Maybe some mysteries are just better left unsolved.
Scooby-Dooby-Doo?
Nessie is real. You heard it here first. And so ends another Scooby-Doo movie. I really don't get why this one seems to get so much mixed reception from critics and fans. Maybe it's just the Nessie lover in me, but I find the entire movie incredibly entertaining all the way through and never find myself bored. The comedy works well, the mystery is intriguing, the setting is beautiful, and the creature is classic. The only major issue the movie has, at least these days I think, is the really poorly integrated CG used to depict Nessie for the majority of the film, though even that is forgivable on the budget these typically have and the constraints of the time period. The animation is otherwise frequently solid and on model, especially compared to Monster of Mexico, which had a visual sloppiness comparable to the original series, even if that adds a charm factor. I wish all the subsequent movies from the era were currently available on Blu-ray, but I'm happy this one at least made the transfer. Okay, just a little side bit, you know, the little tangent thing I love to do. The bonus features for this movie actually contain a featurette that I definitely appreciated when I was young once I upgraded my VHS to DVD. Unfortunately, the Blu-ray excludes all bonus features despite still listing them on the back, but fortunately I still have the movie on DVD. The featurette produced with National Geographic covers several things, such as Nessie's visual resemblance to the Plesiosaurus, and the lack of any water in the loch until long after the dinosaurs were extinct. It also covers the possibilities of things people could be seeing and all of the confirmed hoaxes surrounding the creature. Ultimately, it ends with the answer for whether Nessie is real or not as maybe, or maybe not, which I very much appreciate, just as with the movie itself. We also get features about the clues to the movie, about the various sites visited throughout, and an encyclopedia of Scottish words and phrases for dumb American children. The best feature, however, is definitely the Pixar-style fully animated blooper reel of the gang messing up during the filming of the movie.
Hey ladies, what do you think of my kilt?
Fred, that's not a kilt. That's my new skirt.
No, it's not. It is? I mean, Oh.
Monster of Mexico also had these, and I wish more of them had been made. Side note, in a side bit, if you would like to see me cover Monster of Mexico, let me know. I will probably do it eventually anyway, as I already have a ton of notes on what I want to say, since that is the other movie I previously mentioned, but still let me know. It would increase chances significantly. A big reason for why this movie sticks with me is probably the monster herself. From a young age, I've always been obsessed with the Loch Ness Monster. I think she's fascinating, and I can watch or read content about her endlessly. Like the cryptid chupacabra, again, let me know if you want that Monster of Mexico video. Nessie has been around for a long time. Obviously appearing in Loch Ness and the Scottish Highlands, the public's interest in her has been strong since 1933, and sightings of weird things in the loch go back even farther. As mentioned before when talking about the National Geographic featurette, Nessie visually is said to resemble a plesiosaurus with a long neck and humps, though her appearance can be up for interpretation. Arguably, the first visual sighting of her might have actually been the 6th century in River Ness when a man was attacked by a water beast that mauled him and dragged him underwater, ultimately killing him. This being Nessie is heavily disputed, however, especially with how common water beast stories were during this time. On July 22nd, 1933, George Spicer and his wife experienced the sighting that would popularize her. They described her as a most extraordinary form of animal as they spied her from their car, guessing she was about 4 feet in height and 25 in length, with a long neck that was about 10 to 12 feet, the same width of the road, and no visible limbs. They said she lurched across the road toward the loch and left a broken trail of undergrowth behind her. On January 5th, 1934, Arthur Grant claimed he nearly hit Nessie on his motorcycle. A veterinary student, he described her as having a small head on a long neck and a body that was a cross between a seal and a plesiosaur. As soon as she saw him, he said she crossed the road and returned to the loch, and he only saw ripples when he hurried over to follow. He later produced this sketch of what he saw, and zoologist Maurice Burton believed it to be consistent with the appearance and behavior of an otter. Many believe it was exactly as such, and the poor lighting conditions led him to see distorted body proportions. Then we have the infamous surgeon's photograph, published April 21st, 1934. Assumed to be taken by Robert Kenneth Wilson, a London-based surgeon and gynecologist, he ultimately refused to be associated with the photograph leading to the title. According to him, he was out looking at the loch when he saw her, grabbed his camera, and took 4 photographs in total. Only 2 came out clearly, with only the first being clear enough to attract any attention. Though Marmaduke Wetherell confessed to faking the photo in the 1970s after his humiliating first attempt at a hoax and giving it to his surgeon friend for credibility, for 60 years, people debated that this was either proof of Nessie's existence, or that it was just driftwood or another misidentified animal like an otter. In 1993, the documentary Loch Ness Discovered analyzed the uncropped version of the image and found the object once and for all to be small, only 2 to 3 feet in length overall. Ever since, especially following the publication of the book Nessie, the surgeon's photograph exposed, the photograph is accepted to be a hoax, simply a modified toy submarine still probably lurking out in the loch after being abandoned. In December of 1954, sonar readings were taken in which the ship crew noted a large object was keeping pace with their boat, just like in the movie, at a depth of over 479 feet, and was detected for 2,600 feet before contact was lost and regained. In the aforementioned documentary, a 1960 film by Tim Dinsdale of a hump in the loch was also examined. With the digital enhancement, a shadow in the negative not seen obviously on the developed film was found. With further work, the rear body of an underwater creature was seen. To quote the documentary, "Before I saw the film, I thought the Loch Ness Monster was a load of rubbish. Having done the enhancement, I'm not so sure." Over the decades, only one thing is sure. People are obsessed with her. Everybody wants to steal her loch. Okay, sorry for that. Maybe she's real. Maybe she's always just going to be a hoax and wishful thinking. Either way, it's fun to think about. That's why there's so much media based on her. One of these that I grew up with was the 2007 film The Water Horse, which takes all that lore and builds it into a what-if story about a young boy who finds Nessie as a baby. Eventually, like in most stories of its kind, she gets too big for the bathtub and has to be released into the loch for her own good, leading to all the real-life sightings taking place. Another is the animated Walt Disney animation short The Ballad of Nessie, released in 2011 alongside the wonderful film Winnie the Pooh. Like The Water Horse, the short tells the origin of Nessie and even implies that her tears were what created the loch to begin with. And obviously there's plenty more Nessie media out there, both in documentary forms and fictional forms, enough to keep everyone satisfied. This Scooby movie wasn't even the first time...
I wish Scooby-Doo.
Okay, now I know what you're thinking. We've talked about the movie, we've talked about Nessie, but we can't stop here. Obviously, you want me to address the elephant in the room. Yes, that's right. In the Scooby-Doo show episode, A Highland Fling with a Monstrous Thing, Scooby-Doo and the gang actually visited Scotland and met Nessie previously. I know, it's very controversial and bothers everyone here, clearly. Continuity and lore is very important, and Scooby-Doo has once again disrupted the laws of the universe with this movie. Since this video is longer than my standard fare, let's take a look at that episode now. This was the 6th episode of the Scooby-Doo show Season 3, though as mentioned in previous videos, you'll actually find it under Season 3 of Where Are You on home video and streaming, since it was intended as a revival at the time. As it starts, Castle Macduff is a castle in Scotland being now run by Aggie Macduff. That makes both of these stories that create castles conveniently right by the loch that don't actually exist. Unfortunately, as you can guess, something is scaring away tourists, and she has to call her friend Velma to help solve the mystery. The gang makes their way to Scotland, but the heavy mist once again leads to a few hijinks before they can get there, and they even almost run off the road like in the movie. As they're prone to, they run into a spooky specter playing bagpipes by the loch, immediately followed by an appearance of Nessie herself. The gang tries to get info from the Jelly Scott Inn, but the innkeeper turns them away with a warning to stay away from the castle. After Shaggy almost kills Scooby, the gang finally makes it into the castle. Aggie explains that she and her chief of staff Jamie believe that the ghost is her great-grandfather Finian, who might be unhappy with the castle being turned into a tourist trap.
I've a hunch there's a lot more to it than that.
Of course, Shaggy and Scooby immediately find the food. While here, please look at these faces. As they settle in for the night, Nessie pops in for her second appearance, and just like before, Finian shows up as well. The gang splits up to look for clues, Scooby finds a vanishing Finian behind a door, and a mysterious figure drops our heroes after they manage to actually find a clue for once. Up at the top of the castle, the rest of the gang finds a second clue, a recent newspaper clipping dropped by the ghost for some reason. Fortunately for Shaggy and Scooby, Finian finds them again and we get a classic door chase.
You ain't nothing but a bear's town. Yeah.
They eventually make it back to the others, and Velma's able to put the clues together.
A roll of wire. Are you thinking what I'm thinking, Fred?
I sure am.
Aggie takes the gang down to a part of the castle that was supposed to have been locked off since the Middle Ages, but fresh footprints are all over the path. The gang accidentally splits up again, and Finian catches back up with our heroes locking them in. Aggie tells the others about a boathouse accessible from the lock below, and inside a door that shouldn't have been accessed for ages are boxes of crates full of watches. Finian knocks Shaggy out the window, and Scooby starts playing the bagpipes to get the gang's attention for help. Unfortunately, this attracts the attention of Nessie also. Thankfully, Shaggy catches a ride on her, but less thankfully is Finian, who is now drawing her over to him with his own bagpipes. Fred asks Scooby play even louder until it confuses Nessie and she goes out of control, even catching Finian. Of course, Nessie is fake and Finian is actually Jamie. He'd been making a fortune smuggling in goods, and Aggie's new tourist trip idea was interfering with his plans. He controlled a miniature sub made up to look like Nessie with his bagpipes in disguise as Finian to continue his smuggling while also scaring away any tourists who might see. Aggie is able to open the castle again and they lived happily ever after. No asterisk this time like with Lisa in the Vampire Bats episode. Probably.
Scooby-Dooby-Doo!
Ultimately, it's a fine episode of the Scooby-Doo show, though I wouldn't say it's one of the most memorable, especially when it's surrounded by more iconic episodes and villains during the same season. And for the sake of why we're talking about it, the Scotland as presented in the episode really looks nothing like Scotland, and Nessie barely features in the episode. It's definitely a disappointment for Nessie fans if you came to it expecting something big for her. So I'd say the movie wins for representation. Nessie looks decently like you would expect her to and isn't even that far off from the future movie outside of being hand-drawn, but she has so little to do and is ultimately not real in the plot like in the movie, so that's about all I have to say on that one. Again, it's an enjoyable standard Scooby episode, but ranks low for Nessie points. And so, those are the times Scooby-Doo has gone up against the Loch Ness Monster. She's definitely a creature worth exploring at least twice, so it's no wonder you can't stay away from her like the rest of us. I didn't really grow up with a TV episode appearance, but the movie is probably always going to be one of my weird little personal favorites, even if I'm not entirely sure why. If you made it to the end of this journey through the loch, thank you! Sorry it was a little longer than the first two for absolutely no reason. What do you think of Nessie? Is she out there, or was she just a bunch of misidentified coincidences that led to a lot of hoaxes? I think I'm somewhere in the middle, like I am with ghosts. If she's real, that's super cool. If not, still so fun to think about. If you have anything else you might want me to cover, also let me know. And subscribe. Please subscribe, that's the thing I need to ask you to do. And like the video, that's right. Follow me on Twitter and everywhere else. Bye!